Welcome back to TEF's Travels, everyone. Today we have a review of DFDS Newhaven Dieppe service taken in August 2023. This is a follow-on to a review that I did this time last year and is linked in the description. I'm going to be taking a look at what's changed, what's new, what hasn't changed, and what could be improved. Now, departure from Newhaven is always interesting because there's a lot going on. Whether it be casting off ropes or the activities of a busy commercial port, there's always something to see. And look, over there is the ancient passenger bus that was used for the foot passengers. Seems to have been retired and dumped here at the end of the quay. Maybe convenient for driving it straight into the scrapyard. Who knows? Speaking of the scrapyard, someone seems to have lost their Audi. Perhaps it was a victim of Sadiq Khan's ULEZ. Perhaps they parked in Brighton for 45 minutes and now can't afford to keep the car. I guess that's what they call recycling. Now, subscribers to this channel will know that this is usually based around machinery and engineering. So here's a gratuitous clip of some big machines moving a load of scrap metal. Top notch. That's enough of that. That's put me in quite a spin. Now at this point the ship is heading astern, that is in reverse, down the River Ouse and out into the English Channel. Once we get clear of the breakwater, the ship starts its almost 110-degree turn to starboard, which is to the right, to point us in the direction of France, and you can see there the propellers churning up the mud and sand at the bottom of the river. What we now get is a rather interesting view from the very back of the ship, where we start our turn to the right, and you can see the Seven Sisters, which incidentally was the name of this ship, coming into view and disappearing in front of the ship's head. As you can see, sailing conditions on this day were absolutely perfect. This was a morning departure scheduled for 11 AM, and we had in fact left about 10 minutes early. There was a very hot sun, which we'll come back to later as it caused its own problems, but there was no wind and the sea state was very calm, so no ill feelings today. It's now just after 11 AM, the sun is over the yardarm, and it's time for a drink, and here comes the purser. Perhaps he'll bring me one. Now, sir, I know your rig isn't designed by Christian Dior, but if you're going to dispense with the tie, then please wear a short-sleeve shirt. That's just a preference of mine. So, to the bar, where a wide selection is available, including hot drinks, but as today was absolutely red as, I plumped for something cold and on draft. The beers on board are from Brasserie Souterre in Normandy, and I plumped for their IPA, which at a punchy 6.5% gets the day off to a flying start. Where better to sample a Norman beer than on the quarterdeck under the tricolour on a day like this? Santé. After all that excitement, it was time for lunch at the self-service restaurant. I opted for the pasta dish and asked what it was. I was told pork, and there it is. It's pork. And very tasty it was too. Following that, it was down to the shop for a spot of retail therapy, where you can actually find some really good price deals on duty-free alcohol. If you're in any doubt as to any of these prices, what I recommend is that you stop the video, rewind, and have another look. What I would recommend though is those litre bottles of Bailey's just there. Those were exceptional value, at £12 each. Bottoms up. After all that, it was time for a relaxing sit down on the upper deck of the Bar Cornell, this time with a pint of the Dessae, the lager. Upstairs in the Bar Cornell is probably the best seat in the house, but unfortunately today it was extremely hot. I saw the purser later on and I did ask him if there was a problem with the air conditioning. He said that the problem was with the weather being too hot, and that he'd asked the engine room to provide more cooling. Now, I'm not sure I find that convincing. Not only were these ships built in Spain, so should easily have been able to cope with the high 20-degree temperatures we had on this day, but also I saw various engineers popping in and out of this compartment here, which is the air conditioning room for the upper deck. And I also saw that both of the doors from the bar to the outer deck were propped open with these bar chairs. This happened on the way back as well, so on the same ship, so I'm not convinced it was simply the weather that was to blame. Now, speaking of the bar stools, one of the things I picked up on last year's trip was that much of the furniture was looking really tired. Now, this year I did notice that some, at least some, of the chairs had been reupholstered, like this one. However, they'd done the upholstery, but they hadn't done anything with the woodwork. I mean, nothing at all. That just struck me as a bit odd. You can also see that only some of the chairs have been reupholstered, and I have to say, the original fabric ones are more comfortable than the vinyl ones, especially in this heat. The tables haven't fared too much better either, but maybe they'll get round to those when they fix the air conditioning. Now, the Seven Sisters and her sister ship, the Côte d'Albâtre, are pretty much identical, but how they come up with the names of some of these spaces really is a mystery. Now, last year, one of the things that bugged me was that there were quite a few maintenance problems in the gents' toilets. This year, there don't appear to be any. Well, almost none. Given how hot it was inside, we spent most of the rest of the voyage outside, and given what a beautiful day it was, that was no great loss. And before we knew it, the French coast came into view, and with it, our disembarkation at Dieppe. Now, I won't cover this process in too much detail because it wasn't very different from last year. What I will say is that the French border police did appear to be acting very efficiently indeed, with it taking them between 20 and 40 seconds per vehicle, depending on the number of occupants. This was the case for British vehicles as well as French ones, so there didn't appear to be any effort to hold up the Brits, or any evidence of the complications you might sometimes receive at Dover-Calais route. One thing that may delay your disembarkation is what I can only call car deck roulette. This is where you have absolutely no control over how you're loaded when you board at Newhaven. What I would say is that if you see a gap in front of you, like this car ahead of me, and there's nobody telling you not to use it, then I would just go. This is not a time to be very British about things. So that was our arrival into Dieppe, where we actually spent a couple of days sightseeing. Top of my bill would be the Dieppe Castle Museum, which has got one of the finest collections of nautical art this side of the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich. In addition to fantastic paintings like these, it also tells the history of Dieppe as a town and a port, and I think that's what this particular piece has got some reference to, though I'm not entirely sure. After that, we ventured deeper into Normandy, and one thing I would definitely recommend going back to is the Cité de la Mer at Cherbourg. There you can see and go on board the submarine Le Redoutable. This is a decommissioned nuclear submarine that served in the French Navy for many years. And this side of the Atlantic, it's one of the few submarines you can go on, and I believe the only nuclear submarine outside of the Russian Federation you can visit. It is absolutely fantastic. And if you take a look at some of the shorts videos on my YouTube channel, you'll see some videos from inside and around the boat. Now back to an altogether different type of boat. This was our departure, which came some days later. This was yet another really good fine day for sailing. This was the evening crossing, which was scheduled to arrive back into Newhaven at 2300 hours. The difference between this service and the ones we've been on before was that this was absolutely Harry Rammers. There was almost no space left on the car deck, and we were very, very pleased to have taken the decision to pay for a cabin. The cabin weighed in at 30 quid, which I don't think was particularly bad value for what it allowed us to do. We weren't by any means the last people to come up from the car deck, but those that were would have really struggled to find somewhere to sit, either inside or outside. Being really full meant I finally found out what this upstairs space was. It's simply used as overflow seating for the restaurant when it's full. The other thing about this crossing was it was really, really hot again. Hence, they'd propped open the doors because guess what? The air conditioning still wasn't working. It did have one advantage, which was outside was absolutely glorious. And again, that's where we spent most of our time until it was time to go into the cabin. And if you happen to be on one of these summer evening crossings, it means you might get a glimpse of a really glorious sunset. The sailing conditions today were beautiful, almost no wind and beautiful sunshine and a good temperature as well. Well, certainly outside. I think inside in some spaces it hit nearly 30 degrees, which was very uncomfortable. The dinner choices did leave a bit to be desired, and I think this was because of just how full the ferry was on this crossing. There was a rack of ribs with rice and a pasta dish, believe it or not. At least the bar was well stocked with those fantastic Brasserie Souter beers, so time for another IPA, I think. After that, it was time to inspect the cabin and see what we get for our 30 quid. You get your key, or in this case, swipe card from the reception, which is just behind the restaurant, or indeed forward of the restaurant even. This was a 4-berth cabin with ensuite shower and toilet room, and I have to say it was actually quite good. I've seen budget hotels that are in far worse condition than this. There were blankets and 2 towels provided, although there was no way you would need blankets on a voyage of this temperature. The bathroom itself was well appointed, clean, and perfectly adequate for the purposes. Although the strangely coloured lavatory paper did raise a few eyebrows. Tucked in behind that curtain there is a perfectly usable shower cubicle, and you do get soap provided, although that's the only soap in the bathroom, so if you want to wash your hands, you've got to nip into the shower. The beds themselves were perfectly comfortable for this short voyage, and both of the kids managed to fall asleep. Which of course was an absolute godsend, but was not without its problems, as I'll explain later. That control there is very useful because it turns down the compulsory announcements, which sounded a little bit like Big Brother. And although it doesn't turn them off completely, it does provide some respite. All in all, I would recommend these cabins, as they're perfectly adequate for the purpose and would allow you to get some shut-eye if you've got some long driving ahead of you. Now, the only drawback of these cabins that I could think of was that there was no actual space to sit. There was no chair. So if you are stuck minding the kids while your other half relaxes outside, the only place you can sit down is in the lavatory. But I wasn't going to let that stop me enjoying another fine beer. In this case, a pint of the Dement Bray. Very tasty. If you are able to, it's well worth getting topside and having a look outside on these evening voyages, and certainly in the summer, as the sunsets are fantastic. And of course, what lover of machinery wouldn't like the throb of a diesel engine after dark? And before we knew it, the lights of the south coast of England and the very creepy lights of the Rampion wind farm, all flashing in unison, came into view. And with that, it was time to head back to the vehicles for another game of car deck roulette. Because the ferry was so full this crossing, in our case we had to wait for those freight units on those ramps to be lowered and drive off before we could get out of this part of the deck. There were some people who were on the moving deck even further above us, so they would have had an even longer time to wait to disembark. That said, Border Force were not mucking about, and it was relatively quick through border control. So that was DFDS for another year, and what did I make of it? Well, some things have improved, and it remains good value and quite convenient, and it's a major positive that it's not the Dover-Calais service. So would I use it again? Absolutely, and I would recommend it. Thank you for watching.